Hi, and welcome to Chapter 8, Using Arrays and File Handling. So what we're going to discuss today are arrays, which are objects that allow you to store multiple values of the same type. So for example, if I had 10 integers that I want to store, I can use an array to store those 10 integers, okay? And anytime I want to store a value, update a value, or access a value in the array, I have to use its index, okay? We're going to look at here for the array portion, and you'll notice here how it has subscript or index. So that is the name that we'll be using interchangeably. So whenever you're wanting to access anything inside of the array, you have to use the index or slash its subscript. All right, so what we're going to do so that this shoe size at the bottom, what you're seeing here, will make sense, we're going to go ahead into creating an array. Okay, so let's come here. Now, suppose you want to create an array at class level. So if we wanted to create an array at class level, if you guys recall, class level means that this particular array will be accessible throughout our entire program. All right, test array. And then, so here, this is the name of the array. All right, making sure you include the type here. And then here, you need to have the size. So let's say 3. So this is the size. This means how many, the number of items I will have, the number of elements, okay, as string, because we're going to have string values. All right. And remember, this is the data type. All right, this is the type of data it will hold. So you know that is very important. Those are key components of declaring an array. So this is a declaration. I have not put any information in the array. I've just declared an allocated space for 3 different values. So let's come over here. So 1, and then the index always begins at 0. So this is our index. All right, and whatever we store here will be our value or our element. All right, let's zoom in a little bit and write that a little better. Okay, so this is our element. All right, so whatever we store here will be our element. But right now we haven't stored anything, and this is a string array. So by default, it will be null until we update the value. Okay. All right, so now we've created an array called test array. All right, and it's of size 3, which means it will hold 3 different strings. All right, and now what we want to do is update the value. We want to update whatever information is in there. Now, suppose we wanted to just go ahead and directly manually update the array. What you will use is the name of the array. All right, and the index, let's say we want to update location 2, index 2 to Bob. Okay, so that means now location 2 is no longer null and Bob is there. All right, remember that it's a string, so it used quotation marks. All right, let's say we want to update location 0 to Tim. So now 0 is no longer null. Location index 0 is no longer null. It's now Tim. And then, oh, I think I'm writing too fast. Location 1, Kim. All right. All right, so now our array has been updated. Now, if I want to print one of, say I want to print what's in location 0 to my form, I will use a label. So in order to print, I have to use the name of the array and the index of the location that I want to print. And it'll automatically just print it because it's a string. Okay, so in this case, you don't have to use the toString. You can use it if you want, but it's already a string, so it'll automatically print for you. But if you're printing something from your array, you would want to use the name of the array, and always make sure you include the index. Okay, if you just have the name, you will have an error. Okay, you have to indicate what you're trying to print. All right. So this is just a basic example of creating an array, okay, and how you can print something from your array. Okay, now in most cases you will want to use a for loop to fill your array. So let's do an example where we're using a for loop to fill the array, where we're getting 3 names from the user using an input box. So if you guys recall from chapter 6 where we were using input boxes, that's what we're going to use now, where we're going to ask the user to input 3 names. So it's going to prompt the user for name 1, and then we store it, and then for name 2, and then we store it. Okay, so that means now this array is empty again. So let's just write this over, because all right, so let's do this again. I'm giving myself a little bit more space. We still have a size 3. All right, so 1, 2, 3, and notice that the index always begins at 0. So even though you see 3 here, that does not mean your last index will be 3. 0 offsets it, so whatever value is here will always be -1 when you're looking at the index. Okay. All right, so if I wanted to get information from the user and I want to prompt the user to enter name, so we're going to use a for loop, which we know for loops make things much easier instead of having to write everything manually, especially if we were retrieving 10 or more names. That will save time. So let's go ahead and declare our counter. All right, and then we have our int counter. What would we initialize it to? If you guessed it, 0. Remember, the index always starts with 0, and the counter here is going to represent the index. Okay, and then now we have to indicate what we want it to count up to. So there is a property that we can use. Right now, we already know what the size would be, and we know we would want it to go up to 2, right? But suppose we didn't know how many items we would have. You can use test array dot length. This is a property -1. All right. So length will grab the length of the array, which is 3, and subtract 1 -1, which means 2. So that means it'll count up to 2. So that'll make sure that our array is filled. Okay. So now that we have that, let's put our next down here. All right. So now what we're wanting to do is fill the array. So underscore test array. And then what we're going to use for our index. If you guessed it, int counter, exactly, because this value changes. So each iteration in your loop, that value is going to change. It starts at 0, so that means first iteration, location 0. I want to store this, and then it iterates again and moves to location 1. Okay, so int counter, which means in location 0, and then remember we're using a input box. So input box, and I'm going to drop down here, enter, all right, name. All right, so now we're going to have them enter name, and all we need is their first name. We don't have to have it all, like we just keep it simple just for space wise. Okay. So now we're going to tell them to enter name. And then our caption is going to be names info. Which is basically our title. All right. And it's going to allow the user to enter. So as the user enter their information, so the first iteration is going to ask me for my name, and I enter Kim. All right. The second iteration, which is in index 1, I'm going to enter Tim. And then the last one, I'm going to enter Bob. Okay. So it counts up to 2. It doesn't go out of bounds. So if you just had, if you didn't use the -1 here, it will likely go out of bounds. So it'll throw an out of bounds exception. So you want to make sure that it doesn't go out of bounds. We need it to go up to 2, not 3. Okay. So because of that, now we have values in our array that came from the user. Okay. Now, what if I want to take those values that's in my array and I want to add it to a list box? Okay. What I want you to think about is in this chapter, there is a loop called the for each enhanced loop. All right. So with this particular loop, it doesn't use an index. It just evaluates or looks at the actual element, the actual item that's in the array. Okay. So let's try to make this smaller. All right, let's just scroll it up a little bit. We already know what's in our array. Kim, Tim, Bob. Okay. So the syntax for each enhanced loop. So for each value. So you're not looking at an index. So here you have to indicate the type of value that's inside of your array. So it's a string. So what we have to do is create a variable that will temporarily hold each string. All right. All right. So now for each value, so each name that's in your array is going to store there. Okay. So for each name in, and then whatever name of your array is, so str test array, that's the name of our array. All right. I want to add it to a list box. All right. So we're just going to say we have a list box called add name. Let's call it add name. All right. And do you guys remember how you add items? So items dot add. And now you have to indicate what you want to add to your list box. What currently holds your value in your array? If you guessed it, string name. Yes, because this here was created to temporarily hold each value so you can process it and do whatever you want to do with it. And that's the end of that for each enhanced loop. All right. So now you're saying for each value, that string value in your array here, so that first value, which is Kim, is going to retrieve it and store it here. And then in array, so you have to include the name of your array. So now you have the list box where you're adding each name. So the first, so just think this is our list box here. So in this list box is now taking the information from the array and transferring it to a list box. Okay, so now this list box hold the data, also hold the data that is in your array. Okay, so this is just a super simple example so that you'll see how to use your for each enhanced loop, how to use your regular for loop, how to create an array. Okay, so before we end this video, I want to show you how to create an array of integers. So just want to do at least one more example with a different type. Okay, so take a moment and review the notes here that we've gone over and make sure you're understanding what's happening, and kind of, if you want to pause the video and go back through it, that's totally okay. Okay. I'm gonna clear my canvas. All right, let's go. Oh, let's go back to, let's do about 100. Okay. All right, so now we're gonna look at initializing an array. Say you already know what values you want to go in your array. You can also go ahead and initialize it. So here, well, I think this color is fine. So then, let's say we're gonna do one with integers. All right, so instead of including a size, we're gonna allow the program to determine what size. All right, so as integer, okay, let's make that, make that a little smaller. As integer, okay, quit playing with me. All right, as integer, and now we're gonna go ahead and initialize. So the curly bracket, so 10, 8, 7, 4. All right, and closing brace. Those are the curly braces. It looks a little weird, but it's a closing curly brace. So now this particular size will be determined by the program, how many values we initialize it to. In this case, it's going to give us a size 5 array. So now int values is size 5, okay? So what I want to do is I'm going to go through a couple examples. So we already have the values in our array. So say, for example, we want to take those values and put it in a text box. Let's do another example. So because we just want to transfer the values, we'll just use a for each enhance loop, okay? Now, remember, here we need an integer value that's going to temporarily hold it. So come back here, and I'm going to call it temp, okay, as integer. All right, so now, so now for each value that's in our array, we're going to store it here in, and then whatever the name of our array, which is int values, okay, we want to put it in our list box. Let's just say add values, items, add int temp, because, all right, and then next. So now this statement has taken the values that was in our array and placed it in this list box. Okay, all right, all right. So now we have our list box with these items, and we still have our array with these items. So we have 4 values, so 4 elements in our array and in our list box. So they're just seeing how you can transfer your values between your array and your list box, because that is going to be in the guided portion. So I want to make sure you understand that, okay? Now, what if I wanted to sum up all the values? What do you think we would use for that? And we can actually put it in this same loop here. That in this for each enhanced loop, we can use it. So of course, if we're gonna sum up a value, we're gonna have to use our compound assignment operator. So before we can do that, we need to create a sum integer that's going to add them all up. Let's just initialize it to 0. All right, so inside of this loop, as we're adding the values to the list box, we're also going to sum them up. So we're gonna say int sum plus or equal, this is our compound assignment operator, int temp, because temp holds the values. All right, so int temp will basically hold each value, and it's going to add them all up. And then once this loop is done, we want to print the total to the form. Let's just say total. Close it. Concatenation. and then int sum dot to string general. All right, so now it's just going to print whatever the total is of all those values. So this is an example of using your compound assignment operator. So you're going to see that being used inside of your guided portion as well. So just wanting to make sure you're seeing and understanding what is happening. Okay. All right, so let's come back here. Now you see here that we have an array called DEC shoe size, and in location 0, 9.0, you have these different sizes stored there. Okay, so that's what's happening there. Here, as you saw, we can initialize the array as well. Say you already know what values you want to go in your array. You can go ahead and initialize it to whatever values you want it to be. In most cases with your programs, you will not pre-fill them. You won't go ahead and initialize them. You will actually go ahead and use loops and whatnot. Okay. You can also have parallel arrays. So say, for example, you have an array for names, and then you have an array for reservations. So that means here in location 0 in both of these arrays, this information is related. Although there are two different types of information, Baker has for reservations. So this information is related to Baker, Lopez in location 1, Buck in location 2. So this is considered parallel arrays where you're seeing the information is related to one another. Okay. And we've talked about input box, how you can retrieve the information from the user and store it in your array and use a for loop. So this is another example here where you're getting a value from the user, the temperature, and you're just taking it and storing it in your array. Okay. Here, this is if you wanted to re-initialize your array. In Visual Basic, it's definitely doable. You can basically create a new array. You can change the array. If you want to preserve it, you can preserve it. It works a little different from Java, but in this case, you can preserve the values that's in your original array. Okay. Remember that we talked about the length property. If you don't know the size of the array that you need, you can just go ahead and allow your program to determine that by using the .length property, and it'll determine what the size of your array is as you add values. Okay. You'll notice here an example of taking the items that's in the array and putting it in your list box. So this is another example here. Okay. In this case, this one is using a regular for loop. So you'll notice how it's a little different. So this is the regular for loop where it's counting from 0, which means it's going to begin at index 0 and it's going to count up to the length of the array minus 1. All right, and then you have your list inventory items you're going to add. But instead of using just the name, which we were using for the for each enhanced loop, instead of using that, now you have to use the name of the array and the index so that it'll go and retrieve that value from the array and then put it in your list box. So you do either or. You can use the regular for loop or the for each enhanced loop. Okay. But remember that the for each does not look at an index. Okay. And notice that it breaks it down for each, and then a value that's going to temporarily hold it, the name of the array, and it just continues moving on. Okay. So you notice here for each string value in your famous Computer Pioneers array, this is what I want to happen. All right, remember you can have class level variables. So arrays can be class level as well. So you saw in the very beginning of the video where we created class level arrays. So you can do that as well, or you can create the array inside of your whatever procedure that you're inside. And what will happen is it will be only accessible in that procedure. Okay. But you can also pass it All right, so you can pass an array in this case, and whether you're using a sub procedure or a function procedure. Now notice this one here is a sub procedure, so that means it's not returning anything. So you're passing an array. So notice how it changes. And we've looked at passing by value, we've looked at passing by reference. So here, what you want to do is just see how you're passing by val, and then you're just giving a name for the array. You can use it here, the same name, or you can use a different name, but in this case it's using a different name. And then as decimal, you have to indicate how you're passing, what you're passing, and the type. And then now you're just going to modify. You're taking values and you're adding them to, you're taking the values that's in the array and you're adding them up. Okay, so this array here, decimal commission amounts, is being passed in this procedure call. So it's being passed to this particular procedure, and now you're taking this for each enhanced loop to add up the total of those values. Okay, and then you're going to print it. So that's what's happening. This goes back to chapter 7 when we discuss sub and function procedures, the difference, how to pass arguments to your procedures and all of that. So you can also do that with your arrays. Okay. This is a procedure that allows you to sort the array. So if you want to sort an array and put the values in order, you can. It sorts it in ascending order. Now, the thing is, this is tricky. If you have two arrays that are parallel, where the information is related to each other, you would not want to use sort for one, because then the values that were in that particular array, so say for example the shoe size and the name, if you basically sort the shoe size is no longer related to the appropriate person. So make sure you're using the sort in the right circumstances. Okay. This is another procedure that allows you to search for a particular value. So you can pass the array and search for a value, whatever you're doing, depending on whatever you're looking for. So say you were looking for the value 3, you will pass the array and pass 3, and it will basically return the index of that particular location of that value. If they do not find it, it will return a negative number, a random negative number. All right, these are two-dimensional arrays. You can read through that, but we're not going to go into that to a whole level. We're just going to move into the file handling. Okay. Now, generally, when you're dealing with coding, it's important to use Notepad, use text or text editor instead of Microsoft Word, because Microsoft Word generally has way more symbols and characters than you want to be read, and sometimes it can cause errors in your program. So file handling, we're going to use text files. So this is an example of a text file, and if you'll see, this is a particular file that we'll be using for the guided portion. Okay, so this here, so this here has different items in it. It has the name of the item, then it has the inventory number, then it has the cost and quantity, how many we have in stock. Okay, so that's the information that's inside. Sorry, that is the information that's inside of the file. So this is what we're looking at. We're going to use Stream Reader. All right, Stream Reader is basically a built-in class that allows us to read files. So we're going to use Stream Reader to read the text file. So what happens is, in order for you to get access to that particular class, you have to create an object. So dim object reader as IO input output stream reader. So now this is a input output object that will allow us to read through the file. It'll all allow us to access the procedures and all of that that's inside of Stream Reader. Okay, and so what you want to do is check to see if the file exists. So you'll check to see if it exists. If it does exist, it's going to open it up and then start processing it. If it's not, if it doesn't exist, it's going to give you a message box, an error message box, and it's going to close. Okay. However, if it is there, you're ready to go ahead and read your file. All right. So objectReader.peak will continue reading until there's nothing else left. All right. So as long as there is data inside of your text file, and so remember, this is your not equal to. So when there is no more data in your text file, it'll return a -1, which means there's nothing else there. So this loop will stop. This do while loop will stop. However, if there's still data there, it will continue on. Okay. So let's look at how the file is reading what we're looking at. Okay, let's do, so come on. I want to do side by side. Come on. All right. This one. All right. So now scroll this over so you'll know what's happening, and I go over it a little bit in the video as well, the guided portion. But notice that the do while, it checks to see if there's information in the file, and notice there is information there. So what's going to happen is going to read it line by line. All right, so read line means read the entire line. So now it's going to read this very first line here, which is the inventory item. It's the actual item. All right. And it's going to take that item and it's going to store it in my string here, inventory item array. All right. So it retrieves that object reader.read line will read that entire line and store it inside of my array. And then once it's retrieved that, it moves on to the next line. Okay. And then string item ID, which is the ID for that same item, is going to grab that item and it's going to store it. So that item ID will now be stored inside of your array. All right. Now remember, int counter, it has been initialized outside the loop and it updates here once it's done filling the array. Okay, the first each iteration. All right. All right. So once that item is added, it moves to the price, moves to the next line. And now it's going to retrieve it. But notice this one here needs to be a decimal because it's a price, it's a cost. All right. So what's going to happen is what you're going to do, instead of just storing it, you're using your convert. If you remember your convert, in this case, we're converting to a decimal, and we pass here object reader.read line, which means it's going to read whatever's there, which is the 1599.99, and it's going to convert it to a decimal and then store it inside of your initial price array. Okay. Now that it has grabbed that, retrieved that value, converted it, is now going to move to the next line, which is 12. Okay. And that's the quantity. That's how many we have in stock. Notice that int quantity is integer, so we need to convert it. So convert that to int 32 is going to retrieve that number 12 and convert it for us and store it in our array. So you'll notice that concludes the first iteration. So remember, these are parallel arrays. All these arrays are parallel. So the first iteration is in location index 0. So everything in each of these arrays in location 0 is related to this item. Okay. So now int count actually increments and now is moving to the next one. So now int count has changed to location 1. So now we're here. So all this information will be read. So store display racks will be inside of the inventory item. D208 will now be in the string item ID. 49.99 will be retrieved, converted to a decimal and stored in the price. 112 will be retrieved, converted to an integer and stored in the quantity. And it does that until it gets to the end, to the SOFA, the last one. Once it's done retrieving, there's nothing else there. So it exits this while loop and moves on with the rest of your program. Okay. I know that was a lot, but I just wanted to walk you through and make sure that you are understanding how your program actually, I don't want it side by side anymore. Oops. There we go. All right. So that's us reading the text file. And in this case, we're using Stream Reader, and it's going to read each item, each line. I've walked you through all these. But if you wanted to write to a text file, you will use Stream Writer. So Stream Reader reads a text file, Stream Writer writes to a text file. So in this case, if you're wanting to write information to your text file, you will come here. So notice that we're asking if they want to enter a new name, new information. And if that's the case, we will come here and we will actually go ahead and check to see if the file exists, whatever file you're wanting to write to. And then notice object writer, write line, and then you're telling it what you want to write. So whatever is inside of this array in this location is going to write it to your text file. All right. So also, if the file does not exist, it'll create the file here. All right. And then next line is going to print the password. All right. So notice here, we're still using everything that we've discussed. Notice here, you've created an object writer of this particular Visual Basic class here. And then you're giving it a name. So you're letting it know where you want this information to be written to. And then you just go ahead and include your statements of what you want to include, what you want to print, what you want to put inside. Okay. So that's writing to a text file and reading a text file. Okay. And this here, just the rest of the slide just goes into how we're calculating the depreciation. So I think you guys can walk through this and understand what the calculations are doing and how it's retrieving and different things like that. Okay. What we'll also be doing is using multiple objects. So you'll notice here, let's go back. So you'll notice here, we're gonna create an additional form. All right, so you're gonna be toggling between your different forms. You're gonna have two, all right? And I go over that inside of the guided portion. So make sure you watch the guided video that goes in a little in more detail with the coding and what we're presenting for this chapter. All right, I hope you guys enjoy the arrays, using them. If you have any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, I'll just see you guys in the next video.